Well, folks, at this point, we should be asking ourselves when, not if, Alberta will begin the process to leave Canada. We've already seen in multiple different areas that the people of Alberta have made it very clear. There's a large portion of them. They want to leave. They do not want to be a part of Canada anymore. Now, whether they decide to join the U.S. or form their own independent country, every day it seems more and more probable that they will leave Canada. But today we are going to talk about why Alberta must leave Canada and become part of the U.S. and why I think it'd be okay if Donald Trump decided that he was going to annex Canada, or I should say, Alberta. As a state or a territory, they absolutely must be a part of the United States. Right now, there is huge economic reasoning behind why you would do this. Number one, Alberta is an economic powerhouse. Alberta produces 80% of Canada's oil, roughly 4 million to 4.4 million barrels per day. And roughly 70% of the gas that is generated in Canada is generated in Alberta. This generates over $120 billion annually in gross domestic product. Well, at the same time, this is what's kind of pathetic about this whole situation, is Alberta contributes roughly 17 or 18% to Canada's GDP. Meanwhile, they only have about 10% of the population. 10% of the population generates almost double the amount of GDP. And Canada relies on Alberta's $20 billion in net fiscal contributions to fund equalization. They subsidize provinces like Quebec, places like Manitoba, New Brunswick. These provinces would not be able to do half of what they do without Alberta. And they are so ungrateful. That is what is so sad about it. They are so ungrateful. So ungrateful. Because liberal policies in Canada every day try and strangle the economy of Alberta. Liberal policies like the carbon tax and Bill C-69 cost Alberta roughly $2 to $3 billion yearly in investments. In 2025, Mark Carney won the election to be the next prime minister. And it truly raises the fears of new taxes, oil export taxes, which will 100% threaten Alberta's $150 billion annually U.S. export industry. Every day, they send about $500 million, $500 million in exports to the United States. And there is a national unity crisis that is boiling over. And Premier Danielle Smith has been warning of this national unity crisis for years. And she's saying that the only way that they can solve that without Alberta leaving is if roughly 9 or 10 oil and gas policies are not repealed. Policies that specifically target Alberta in their energy dominant economy. Because the reality is, it's kind of pathetic. You have people like Doug Ford out there who, talking about leaving Canada, that's the real national unity crisis. Where have you been for the last 50 years, bro? Like, honestly. Do you not remember when, in the 80s, liberals under Pierre Trudeau basically tried to take control of the entire oil and gas industry? They crippled Alberta's economy. They're like, hey, give me money, but at the same time, I'm going to spit in your face and ask you for more money. That's what they want. No. It is not their fault there's a national unity crisis. It is the radical left-wing liberals, the climate change whack jobs in Canada. That is why you have a national unity crisis right now. That is why. Because here's the reality. 70% of Alberta's exports go to the U.S. And joining the U.S., becoming a part of the U.S., would eliminate those trade barriers. There are studies that show the GDP would increase roughly 3 to 6% overnight. Not a single thing would change except some of these barriers would go down. GDP would increase up to 6% overnight, snap of a finger. Look at the United States. Look at places like Texas. Look at North Dakota, Montana, where they have much, much lighter regulations and have a similar, resource-driven economy. Just look at the growth rate. 2023, Texas, their GDP grew 5.7%, even while they had a liberal Democrat, Joe Biden, trying to strangle the oil and gas industry in America. But they still grew almost 6% that year. You look in Alberta, they only grew 1.5% in that same time period, which is just a complete joke. And this separatist surge is going to continue because this liberal victory in 2025 will deepen Alberta's alienation. Only 24% of Albertans feel that they are respected by Canada. Roughly 52% of Canada in general, nationally, feel like they are respected. Albertans, only 1 in every 4 Albertans feel like they are respected by the national government. And an Angus Reid poll in 2025 shows that up to 30% of Albertans would vote to leave Canada. There's actually another poll that came out most recently, even after, from Angus Reid, that said up to 40% after the election, 40% of people are either want to leave or are leaning towards leaving. And that is up roughly from about 25% pre-election. And conservative voters are driving this sentiment. They feel shut out. They 100% feel shut out. And they are shut out. That's exactly why. And don't give me this BS about how wanting your own sovereignty, that's created a national unity crisis. Just give me a break. Give me a break. It's kind of funny. Mark Carney went to the White House and told Trump Canada's not for sale. Well, we'll see. Maybe Alberta, maybe they're not for sale. Maybe they just don't want to be a part of Canada anymore. Maybe the U.S. is a much better partner. And even if Alberta doesn't become a province or a territory or a state in the United States, having a strong defense agreement, a strong economic agreement between the United States and Alberta is so vital. Not only, it's like primarily for Alberta, because Alberta's going to hurt. If they leave Canada, it's like there will be some hurt afterwards. Long term, it could be very good for them, but there will be a lot of hurt right afterwards. But there's going to be way more problems for Canada as a whole than there will be for Alberta. And if they make strong diplomatic relations with the U.S., economic ties, defense ties with the United States, that could 100% really soften the blow. You could have a soft landing when you leave. Now, right now, Premier Danielle Smith is not endorsing secession or leaving or becoming a part of the U.S. She definitely aligns more with the people who want to leave, the Alberta Prosperity Project, but she is definitely leveraging these grievances to get concessions from the federal government. That is her goal. She has said she doesn't support separation, but she's damn well going to use separation to get as many concessions from the federal government as possible. Because let's be honest, yes, would it be wonderful if Alberta became part of the U.S.? Would the U.S. be a dominant force? Would they have energy independence? Would it be great? Absolutely. I think it would be wonderful for Alberta and the U.S. The reality is that going to actually happen? Yes. Does every day I feel like we're getting closer? Yes. Do I actually think that it's going to happen? Because you did all of these hoops that you're going to have to jump through. They're going to have to get consent from the rest of Canada in order to do that. But maybe Trump could go on and just say, you know what, this is actually ours now. It's kind of illegal. Might be a crime against humanity, which we don't really want to do that. We're just... The reality is Alberta's been abused. They have been abused so badly. And Danielle Smith, she's smart. She's very smart. She's going to use this to try and get concessions from the federal government. In Alberta, they would fit in with the U.S. if they decided to come this way. Alberta's conservative values align with red states in the United States on things like gun rights, God-given rights. Let's talk about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights. And as a U.S. state, Alberta would gain congressional representation, unlike Canada, where... I actually have a chart, and I'm going to try and pull it up real quick. Okay, here it is. This is something I found very interesting. On a per capita basis, Alberta has the least amount of representation per capita in Canada. Albertans pay the most. They pay $20 billion into the federal coffers per year for equalization. Alberta is the entire reason why Canada has grown at all. Like the last 15 years of Liberal control has been horrible for Canada. It's been terrible. But Alberta has the most federal obstruction to the economic prosperity of their province. Look at this right here. Alberta, the average population per write-in is 125,000 people. Why is it in places like Nunavut or Yukon or the Prince Edward Islands? So they somehow get 4 with roughly the same... How does this make sense? So it's like, these are things that they need to get concessions from. If there's going to be a serious talk about them staying in Canada, they need more autonomy over their province, and they need better representation. This is a joke. And they at least need to have something more along the lines of Quebec or Manitoba. I think somewhere in the 80 to 100,000 per ride-in. I think that's a good place to be. I do. Because it's a complete joke. It is a joke. It's a joke of how they're treated. They fund the rest of Canada, but they have the least amount of representation per capita. How does that make sense? But you think about it, if Alberta were to become part of the U.S., and Trump definitely loves to push the whole 51st state rhetoric. He loves pushing that. He loves it. And figures like Jeff Rath are pushing closer to the U.S. ties. They want to have deeper ties economically with the U.S. And they would have deeper ties if Canada wasn't trying to strangle their economy. And the U.S. would offer tons of investments, tons of jobs, appealing to Alberta's youth. Because look, the reality is the career prospects in Alberta are not great. They're not as good as they once were. Come to the United States. It is much better here. Not everything is perfect here. Do not get me wrong. Not everything is perfect here. And there's going to be some dumbass. Sorry, I probably shouldn't have said that. But there's going to be someone in the comments. Oh, well, my health care. My health care. Listen up, pal. To the 4 people who, here's the reality. You want to sit here and complain about your health care, yada, yada, yada. How about this? How about you start paying your fair share? Because you know what? Places like Canada, they have price controls in place. That they do. They have price controls in place. And you know what happens? Is the American consumer has to pick that up. We are the ones who end up picking that up. We are the ones who, why are 50 to 60% of all new pharmaceutical patents filed in the U.S.? Because this is where they know they can actually make a profit on this. They go to Canada, it costs them, let's say, let's just say it costs them on a per unit, some sort of pharmaceutical drug. It costs them, $200 to manufacture, but Canada has a price control in place that says, nope, we don't pay more than $100 for this. Well, they got to make it up somewhere. In America, we fund research and development, places where they don't have socialist-style healthcare systems. You want to sit there and complain about, my health insurance is going to go up. How about you just start paying your fair share? How about that? Pay your fair share. But trust me, there's a million more benefits, starting with just economic freedom in the United States. But we know there are going to be a lot of challenges and barriers to this. There's a lot of the constitutional and practical barriers. Secession will require Canada's constitutional approval, and the U.S. Congress will have to approve, which is probably going to be nearly impossible. And supposedly, the First Nations are going to need, you're going to need approval from them, which, as of right now, they oppose separation. But there's been polls that have been taken that the more they hear that the First Nations oppose separation, the more likely people in Alberta are to support separation. But at the end of the day, you're still having, as of right now, 60% of Albertans who say they're going to vote against leaving Canada. This is what needs to happen. If they really want to leave Canada, this is what they need to do. They need to hold the referendum vote off until 2026. They need to allow Danielle Smith to negotiate with the federal government. If they are not able to get concessions, that is just how this issue could boil over to 50+% support or approval in the province. If they do it right now, they're going to get 40%. If you let this boil over, if you give Canada a chance and then they really give you the middle finger, then you may have 50%. Or you may get a really good deal from Canada and it might make sense to stay inside of Canada. This is, you can use this both ways for actual separation, or you can use this to actually just gain leverage. But the reality is Alberta and the infrastructure that they have in place, especially Canadian infrastructure, but ultimately there'd be no issue hooking up the infrastructure. A lot of their infrastructure goes into the U.S. Most things come into the U.S. from Alberta, whether it's through pipelines or whether it's through the railways. They trade more north and south than they do east and west with the rest of Canada, which that puts them in a perfect position to join the United States. Because separation really does reflect real frustrations. But there are legal hurdles, cultural from the First Nations, but legal hurdles that do make it a long shot. It's like, if I had to put a percentage, 3, 4, 5%, like probability, use this to leverage, use the threat of the 51st state as leverage to get what you want from Canada. To have more autonomy, to stop the liberal regulations. But also, you know that you could do a lot of damage to their economy. Alberta is a vital role in Canada's economy. And they clash with these liberal policies. And this election win will drive more separatist calls. And a strong U.S. ties makes annexation very, very appealing, but there's a lot of obstacles that remain. So whether it's annexation, whether it is independence, whether it's more autonomy, whether it's a better, a economic deal with the United States directly, cut Alberta or cut Ottawa out, Alberta makes a deal directly with the U.S., that could be great. So the question is, could Alberta join the U.S. or is Canada just going to hold on? Are they just not going to let it happen? So let me know your thoughts down below. Do you think the U.S. should annex Canada? Do you really think that it could actually happen though? Let me know your thoughts down below. As always, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And folks, we will catch you next time.